My dear friends, I would like to dwell on one issue this Sunday. The element of ruin of all through this loss of simple poverty and emptiness of which this gospel is a part. The desert, the poor have the good news spoken to them. And there are reasons why I want to approach this morning. I would like to share something which I've been meditating on in the hours of night and which has been talking to my heart quite strongly, and therefore perhaps will talk also to yours. In life there are milestones. Some dates are such. Well, this particular day, the 9th of December, is one such. Because the 8th of December fell on a Sunday, or I think actually it was more a question because the Archbishop wasn't free, precisely because it was a feast, that he said, "I'll come on the 9th." And so I had to renew my vows for 24 hours in the prior's cell. And the Archbishop came the following day, this day. And that was the crunch, because you know that until you are perpetually professed, you can't be ordained. That was the important step, irreversibly taken, which opens all doors. But I would like to share just a few moments of that day with you. It was only nearly exactly a year previously that I'd arrived at that monastery in Italy, having been transferred urgently from Ireland. It was actually for this very feast, and there was a young postulant being clothed as a novice for the feast. That was a year previously. The Archbishop, in good Italian style, was very laid back but very good. "Oh yes, that's quite enough, a year," and the whole lot came very quickly. But I'd just like to share those graces with you, and you'll see why at the end. I got to that monastery, and here we are. It's a gem, one of the most beautiful churches in the whole of Italy, completely unspoiled. Una meraviglia in Toscana, they say, a marvel in Tuscany. That was the high altar around which everything revolved. And literally, because the High Mass and the Pre-Most Rite, normally there would be a cloud of incense right round the altar every day, because the deacon with a full-length censer goes round while the preface is being chanted by the celebrant and covers the whole high altar with a cloud of glory. And every day there is incense at the High Mass. That's the life. And that altar we decided to keep and not to touch in the slightest. Therefore we were celebrating towards the rising sun, towards that old crucifix, which, by the way, was miraculous. Do you know what happened to that crucifix some years ago? The local authorities wanted to take it away, to put it in a museum. At that time, the monastery was only a church. It was not occupied by monks. We opened it. Now, what happened? When it was taken, that old medieval crucifix, very realistic and very majestic, Christ sleeping in glory on the cross, the centre of much attention and prayer for many, many years. When that crucifix was taken from the abbey, the whole of that area started to move. There were earthquakes and the earth would not stand still. And it's on record, I've read the archives. It was recognised by the local authority. We can't stop the earth moving. It's since that crucifix was put away. So the people insist, "Bring back our Christ." And they got their way, and the authorities had to yield. Remember that Tuscany was a bit communist at that time. Could have gone either way. The crucifix came back, and immediately the earth started to behave. So there he is. And towards that we would celebrate the unchanging sacred mysteries in Latin every morning. And that's where we were taught, and that's where we celebrated our first Masses. Now, when I got there, I was knocked for 6 by what? Here we are, in choir, our brethren on one side of the choir. That's the founding prior, who's a saint. That was one big issue. Being guided by a man of God until death is not an indifferent grace. It can make all the difference. A man who cares for your soul. Now, that church was a place where the past had stood still. There was not a sound in that church at night. We were in the middle of nowhere. And when you just opened your mouth and chanted one note, Deus, 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 in adiutorium, torium, torium, it would go up into the huge rafters and come down. That was the power of the acoustics. Perfect! Way back in the moment in which it was built. Because this church was built next to the church which we still had, the present sacristy, which was around the period of Charles the Great, about 800 AD. This was later, the present church. Now, what am I getting at? When I got there, it was very, very poor, simple, and uncluttered. And there was a beauty there in the just possible hours of nothing at all, except breathing in the silence and the odd soul coming for confession. What happened? Not overnight, but bit by bit. One of the greatest, I would say, communities in its potentiality opted for what? Taking on things, taking on one more thing after the other. So that not straight away, but bit by bit, the object was not essentially contemplation with a bit of action running out of it, but action, hyper-action, with a bit of contemplation thrown in when you can get it. And it was only in the short period of a few years I saw the change. They started building an enormous structure, much bigger than the monastery itself, for young people to come. So what happened? You had hundreds and hundreds of young people, which is a lovely thing, and then other groups as well. And then you had choirs coming on a Sunday. So what happened? Instead of just the quiet monastic chant, you had huge polyphonic choirs coming with all the preparation that involved. In other words, an agora of anything but the vertical. I'm not criticizing, I'm just describing what happened. What happened then? You do that, and what happens to your soul? You are dispersed. Your soul is pulled all over the place. And when you're alone, you're not alone. You're full of all the cosmos trying to pull at your mind. You are distracted and distraught. It is not the same. One day, I was quietly in prayer by my bed. I had no voice or anything, but just a nudge, and listen to your nudges. It was just this. Don't forget about I. Don't forget about I. And those quiet nudges sometimes are enough to get back all that really matters. Enough of nothing to feel something. So with that, I leave you in the desert with just one thought. It's this. I've given you this a long time ago, but I want to mention it again. It's because it applies to you directly. Translate what I've said to your life. Is it true or not that you could have higher quality of life if you did sometimes fewer things, if you heard fewer words, if you sometimes tasted the moment going by and loved God present where He is? I leave this with you because it's worth meditating on. Joy is made of peace, and peace is made of simplicity.